Welcome. We're going to be looking at, in this video, we're going to be looking at using additional materials in your writing. So actually going beyond the process of selecting your additional materials and actually thinking about incorporating them into your writing and also including them in basically in the sense that you're thinking about the purpose for it. And that's what this video is about. It's about finding the purpose for including an additional piece and basically to think about why you're including it. So to start with, using additional materials basically is to prove that you're widely read and you're able to incorporate a number of different perspectives. In other words, you're able to show that you can go outside of what the prescribed text offers in terms of analysing an area of study or a topic or anything else like that, and to provide another perspective, to provide another point of view on it, even though it is one that will be generally about the same as the one that you're using for your prescribed text. I mean, the purpose of it and the role of the prescribed text and the additional text and why it works is to do with basically cementing and essentially reinforcing the argument that you're giving when you are using your prescribed text. So we'll look at that as well. Okay, so you basically in this you can show how different perspectives can both complement and subtract from the construction of meaning. Now, we're not going to be focusing on it so much in the subtraction process because we don't want to be doing that. But it's about why you're choosing materials, and you can choose an additional material which can subtract from your overall argument, and that's something you don't want to do. So we'll also look at basically by making good choices, you won't be doing the ones which, or using text that will take away from your argument. You're only going to be using text that are going to complement your argument. Okay? So let's have a look at what you need to do to find one that is just right. Basically, we're going to look at the Goldilocks theory here. And first of all, a good additional text should have a similar, though not the same perspective as your prescribed text. In other words, it should have a similar perspective. It should be roughly on the same line of thought, but it doesn't represent the exact same ideas that you're representing for your prescribed text. So if it does and you seem like you're repeating yourself, choose something else. If you've got nothing to do and you're having to construct an entirely new argument around your second text, again, not a good idea. The how, basically your additional text must be alike in some ways, but also have some noticeable differences. So it should be similar in a way that basically there are some things that both texts have in common, but there are also some differences and some significant differences that allow you to bring in a fresh perspective. So that basically you've got a point of view which is not too far removed from what your main argument is, but it's not too close either. So you can add something, but not too little and not too much. And finally, having a text which is too similar adds nothing, and having a text which may contradict your main text is also a bad idea as well. So anything like this will basically subtract from your main argument. If you're repeating a point, it goes for the overkill mode. In other words, if you've got something that's too similar to your prescribed text, it's just going to overkill your argument, and it's just going to basically, Mark is going to go, why are you repeating this? Why are you saying this to me again? You've already said this, you've already proved this, you don't need to say it again. As for the difference angle, if you have to construct an entirely new argument, and particularly one that may even contradict your prescribed text, then again, you basically waste a lot of effort. And think of it this way, what the purpose for you using this, and we'll go into this a bit later, is to build on what you've already got, not to completely start afresh and start anew. So if you have to do that to fit your extra additional text in, you need to choose another text. Simple as that. Okay, so how can it complement it? First of all, in themes. As in the two texts should have similar themes and provoke similar trains of thought, i.e., for example, death unifies people. Okay, so if the text has that as a common theme or a common ground, a common message, yet get there for entirely different ways, that's what you'd be looking for. So something along those lines, something where there's a similar message in there, and it provides a similar sort of a background and a similar sort of line of thought that it's trying to get its audience to receive. It may be in terms of its content, as in it may be just to have similar or similarities in subject matter, predominantly about people dying. Okay, so again, it's one of those things that again fits in with that theme, but also, and basically your content or your theme should should come from your content. So the content of your stories is a very important part of it. So those two things do complement each other. They work together. And then they will complement your described text. And finally, perspective. As I mentioned before, that there should be a lot of similarities in perspectives. Human life is undervalued, something along those lines. Now, if you have enough similarities in these things, it means that you can build upon what you've established with your prescribed text. That all of these things are going to be similar enough that you don't have to completely start again, and you're able to use these things quite effectively. Okay, so as long as those ideas are in there and sort of really come across quite strongly, then you've got something that's quite useful. Now, you can have some differences in the text, and these are the sorts of differences you can have. For instance, representation. The text may represent similar ideas in entirely different ways. One may do it spiritually, one may do it literally. As in, if you're talking about death, one might literally talk about the act of someone dying. One may talk about the spiritual act of death and the way it all works. So the method of representation is really important. And it's also in terms of media as well. I haven't really included that angle, but in terms of the media. So if you've got one film and one poem, they will of course do represent similar ideas in different ways. But you can do it even just on a text-to-text level. In a similar text, you can represent ideas in entirely different ways. Through context. So time and place. You can have text set in entirely different times and entirely different points of view. So one could be set in 1885, one could be set in the near future. And yet they'll still contain the same ideas as we saw in the last slide, where basically you had the similar idea of unifying death, and there's a lot of death around, and there's similar aspects of human life is undervalued, things that never change, those sorts of things. And even in those two different contexts, we get the exact same ideas. Now, this will complement each other because you can basically show through time, through context, that we have these similar ideas sort of coming through. And obviously, the way that different people in different societies deal with those issues is going to be different. And finally, your characters. So your characters can be completely different in the style of manner. So one could be a professor, one could be an action hero. It doesn't really matter. In the case of Indiana Jones, like we've used in the image there, it can be both. So basically that representation as well through the characters and through the different voices, even though they are different in voice, their perspective is somewhat the same. So you can use different voices to say the same thing. And that's basically what you'd be using, or why your characters can be quite different and still represent a theme in a similar and in a way that complements your prescribed text. So even if your characters are completely different to those which are included in your main text, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so let's look at an example. Now, for those of you who are doing HSC English Advanced, this would be a familiar example to you, which is actually part of the text and context unit, which is two texts which complement each other of Frankenstein, Blade Runner. And the reason you study them together is because they do complement each other. And this is a similar way you have to look at covering your additional material in a prescribed text. In other words, that they should go together like these two do. And we've got some similarities and differences. So basically they have a similar relationship between both of them. And whichever one you consider to be the main text and which one you consider to be the prescribed text, it doesn't really matter, because they both complement each other and they both do so in such a way where their point of view does come across quite similarly, and yet there's enough differences to add a fresh perspective with both ones. So if you're discussing Frankenstein and then start discussing Blade Runner, you're going to be adding a new perspective to pretty much the same idea, the same argument. Now, their argument, which is quite the same, both are cautionary tales about playing God and creating artificial life with its own sense of humanity. That's what these texts have in common. They both have that at the heart of their stories. So you can basically construct an argument around this and be able to continue it on without any sort of issue at all. And yet there are also some differences. The context, the characters, and the representations of artificial life are both quite different. In fact, they're hugely different. So this representation gives you basically some points of view and some issues relating, or issues that stem from the text, which can basically add to this and can set apart why these two are different, and even the time periods. I mean, one is set in the 1800s and one is set in the near future. So basically through those 2 times we get 2 different ways of looking at the exact same idea, the exact same issue of playing God, and basically the exact same sorts of characters. And even though the characters are generally quite different in terms of a lot of the other traits, they still have that sort of unique or that linked sense of humanity, which is basically similar in both texts. So you've got some similarities, but you've also got some differences which are going to add something new, but the similarities, which means you can continue it on. All right, so some tips. How are you going to basically find what is the best one and basically to use one that's really going to suit your response? First of all, you should check your synopsis of your text before you read it or watch it. Make sure it's going to fit in with any of the ideas that are going to be covered in your prescribed text. Look at a different text type from your text that you're studying. So if you're studying a film, have a look around at another thing, because automatically through the different media and for a different mode of representation, you're going to get a different way of looking at the same idea. Now, and that's if you find, of course, 2 texts that have a similar sort of story and a similar sort of theme. But by basically just having 2 different text types, you've automatically got what you'll be looking for. Avoid some trivial similarities, as in if they both have robots in them, that doesn't really mean anything. All right, try and find them in terms of theme and in terms of idea and in terms of the way that the text is sort of centered morally. Don't focus on trivial things and say, well, it's got something similar because there's 2 people and they do this and it's sort of the same. It's not really going to get you a deep argument, so stay away from those sort of trivial ideas. And finally, look at their context. If they're set in entirely different times, great, use it, because they're going to come up with 2 different sets of ideas and 2 different ways of representing the same idea. So in terms of, like that example we used for Blade Runner and Frankenstein, they both have the same idea, and yet they're both represented differently. Okay, so in summary, you need to basically find the right text. That's the priority and particularly the purpose for what you're using additional materials for, is to find the right text that's going to complement everything you're doing. It's a waste of time if you don't. You need to find something with similar ideas, and also you need to find one that is representing those ideas differently. And basically, in conclusion, that's what you should be looking for, and that's what you should be doing when you're trying to find the additional text which is going to be right for you and is going to be right for your response. Of course, you may be asked to come up with a couple of them, in which case the exact same principles apply. You just be looking around for another sort of text, another perspective, another idea. Now, it's always good to have a number of different texts and texts which cover a number of different aspects. We've only covered it in the sense of one idea here, but of course there are other ideas which have been represented by those texts and which will be represented by text in your areas of study, which you will also need to be able to cover with an additional text. So you may have one text for one sort of set of ideas and then another text for another set of ideas, and they can basically sort of work off each other. And that works completely well as well. In fact, that's what you should be trying to do. So look for things that are really going to add to what you're doing. I mean, think about it in terms of, you're not doing it because someone asked you to have an additional text handy. You're doing it because you really want to strengthen your point of view, strengthen your argument, and show that you are a clever little person who can basically add something to their argument. And that's basically what you're trying to do, is you're trying to prove how clever you are. So find something that makes you look clever and you'll have no problems doing it. And otherwise, until next time, I'll see you later.